Hi. So I grew up in the Three Villages. I grew up in Setauket. And my husband's from California, and when I brought him here as a prisoner of love, he was like roaming around Setauket, and he said, "Do you have any idea how interesting where you grew up is? Did you know about that house down at the bottom of the hill? Do you know how old that house is?" And I was like, yeah. He said, "Do you know how important Setauket was during the Revolutionary War?" I was like, I don't know. Because, you know, when you grow up someplace, you're more concerned about what's going on in your high school or what's going on with your friends. And then, recently, just towards the end of the spring, I was watching TV, and I turned on, I came across this TV show called Turn, which is about, on AMC, and I pressed the info thing, and the title of the episode, which is about the Revolutionary War, was The Battle of Setauket. The Battle of Setauket? Oh my gosh! So I started watching this. This show, and I'm hearing all these names from Setauket. I'm hearing about Strong, and I'm hearing Woodhull, and you know, all these names that I knew of streets around where I lived. And it wasn't a very good show at all. But I got very, very interested in what happened during this time. So I went out on a quest, and I found this story. So out in Oyster Bay, there is the Townsend House. Now I got very interested in this because Robert Townsend Drive was right across from my house here in Setauket, right? So, but he had a house in Oyster Bay. Actually, his father had a house in Oyster Bay. And back then, in 1777, right when the Revolutionary War was starting, that part of Long Island was occupied by the British, and it was a big house for the time. It had 4 rooms. It had a kitchen, and it had like a little store, and it had a sitting room on the bottom, and it had 1 extra bedroom at the bottom, and upstairs there were a couple more bedrooms. And because it was a big house, the British came in, and they occupied it. And into that bottom bedroom moved a man named Colonel John Simcoe. So he moved into that room, and every day, in came all these British officers, in and out of this house, and they were hosted by Townsend and his daughters. He had 3 beautiful daughters who were very young and were known to be very good at talking, and very good at entertaining, and very wonderful at throwing tea parties, and they were quite charming. In fact, Colonel John Simcoe was very, very taken up with Sally Townsend. Her name was Sarah, but they called her Sally. He was very taken up with Sally, and he wrote her what is on record as the very first Valentine. To your heart I must preside, oh choose me for your Valentine. It's a lot longer than that, but that's the way it went. So, he was very, very taken up with Sally. And as I said, we don't really know if she liked him or not, but she was charming, and she took care of these men that came in through her house. The other character in this story was a man named John Andre, who was very close to Colonel Simcoe, and he would come in and, oh, he was gorgeous. He was beautiful, he was charming, he spoke 4 languages, he drew things, and women loved him. And he was welcomed by the family. They just welcomed all these people into their house. They had nothing to, they couldn't do anything because the British were occupying this place. Well, as these British people were going in and out of the Townsend house, what they didn't know was that Robert Townsend, Sally's brother, was a chief leader in the Setauket Spy Ring, George Washington's Spy Ring, and he had a store in Manhattan. And this is the way things would go. He would listen around Manhattan. He would listen to things that were going on with the British, and he would find out information, and he would give it to a pub owner from Setauket, who would take it back with goods, and they'd hide it in the goods. And the pub owner would go back to Setauket, right? And then they'd take the information, and they'd go across the Sound, and they'd go to Major Talmadge on the other side in Connecticut, and they'd give him the information, and he would give it to George Washington. And that's the way it went. And this is how it would go. All these messages were being passed back and forth, over and over in this circle. Well, once in a while, the Townsends would hear something interesting coming through their house. And this one time, Sally saw a British officer come into the house and make his way into the kitchen. Well, men don't belong in the kitchen. There was no need for this man to be in the kitchen, so she watched him. And he went over to a little drawer in the kitchen, and he put in a letter. And he sealed it up, and he went away. And so she went in, and she took the letter out, and she read it, and it looked like just a business letter, but it was written to John Anderson. And she didn't know any John Anderson. So she folded it away, she put it away, and she decided to watch what would happen. Well, a few minutes later, in walked the handsome debonair John Andre. John Andre, and he went right to the drawer, and he picked up the letter, and he just slipped it in his pocket. And Sally appeared at the door, and she said, Major Andre, is there something I can help you with? And he said, oh, Sally, no, you know, I must say, I smelled the most wonderful scent coming out of this kitchen, and I knew that you had been perhaps making these lovely pastries, these lovely donuts. I was wondering, may I have some? I know it's a bit early. Do you mind if I take one? They smell so good. Well, no, of course, Major, help yourself. And he took a couple of donuts, and off he went. And a few minutes later, Colonel Simcoe called out and said, Sally, do you mind bringing in some tea and some donuts to us? Major Andre and I have a meeting. And they went into his room and they shut the door. And Sally went and she prepared the tea and she prepared the pastries and the donuts and she brought it in and she set them down for the men and she closed the door and she listened outside. And she heard West Point. West Point. West Point. So she got out a piece of paper and she wrote a message to her brother in Manhattan, and she wrote down that something was going to happen at West Point and that John Andre may be John Anderson and may be doing something very fishy very, very soon. And she folded up the letter and she sealed it and she said to another officer, please, do you know that I have run out of my favorite tea and we're having a party tomorrow? Would you just please run off to Manhattan to my brother? He knows the tea I need. Thank you so much. And the officer went and took this message for the tea out to Robert Townsend, who got the message and found and knew that something was going to happen at West Point. And he took that message and he took some other information and he gave it to the pub owner, and they got some supplies, and they went out to Setauket, and they crossed the Sound, and they went to Major Talmadge, and they delivered the letter, and Major Talmadge gave it to George Washington, and because of that note, West Point was saved from the British attack, and Benedict Arnold was captured, and so was John Andre, and he was hanged. Now, no one really knows what happened in the relationship between Colonel Simcoe and Sally. But he was transferred after that to Canada, and he never saw her again, and she never married. But when she died, they found his poem, his Valentine, in among her things, and it had been folded and creased and folded and refolded over and over again. And there are still stories that the ghost of Sally Townsend still haunts that house in Oyster Bay to this very day.